Welcome. Welcome everybody to today's discussion on lessons learned through the first year of the conflict minerals requirement. Well, this is a timely topic. Yesterday, the SEC made it clear that they're not backing down. Conflict minerals requirements are here to stay, and companies must be conflict minerals compliant in the next 30 days for the first year. In the course of this webinar, you'll have the opportunity to gain insights in achieving compliance from our panelists and your fellow participants. I'm Rob Casemeyer of Green Status Pro. I'll be moderating today's discussion and directing your questions to the panel. The main speakers will be our panel members. All are industry leaders who will be sharing their experiences. We have substantial expertise among our participants as well, so we can all look forward to a rich discussion and lessons learned. Green Status Pro is delighted to sponsor this event. For those participants who are struggling to gain compliance in the next 30 days, and those that are looking forward to substantially improving your conflict minerals compliance process for next year, we invite you to a special presentation directly following this session to see how to automate the process of becoming compliant, improve your accuracy, and save hundreds of hours with Green Status Pro. Mark is, as compliance officer for Plantronics, Mark has been involved with a variety of global material content compliance programs, including conflict minerals, for the past 9 years. Mark has been active in ASM International and has a BS in physics from Case Western. Gary Felker manages EH&S for Quantum Corporation. Managing programs for over the past 29 years, Gary has developed a thorough knowledge of environmental health and safety compliance regulations and requirements, including conflict minerals. For the past 10 years of his engineering career, David Cheeks has focused in product environmental compliance, including reach and rose, as well as conflict minerals. He is currently a contractor providing product environmental support for a leading avionics company. David is a master's in EE from University of Colorado and a BS in computer engineering from California State University. We're delighted to have Mark, Gary, and David lead today's discussion. What are the 5 biggest challenges you faced in dealing with conflict minerals? Mark, could you lead us off with a 3-minute summary, followed by Gary and David?
Okay, sure. The challenges occurred basically from start to finish, from starting with the program to where we are right now, and sort of in order. We first started doing scoping. It was easy to know that we were in scope, 3TGs on all our products, obviously, and then trying to find out who in the supply chain we needed to get to, from going to the AVL, finding out who would have the 3TG in their products, and then actually finding out which one of those suppliers would actually be in scope, eliminating software suppliers, distributors, packaging, collateral. Then when we got down to that list, then finding the correct contact in all of those companies, because often the person that purchasing would go to would not be the person for us to go to. And then finally taking that group and reducing them to the critical suppliers, based on risk, and getting down to a reasonable number and focusing on those suppliers. Then the next challenge was evaluating the responses, and the first ones were not very good. They were PDF statements, and they didn't use a CMRT. The declaration questions were internally inconsistent. Then the smelter lists, as we've kind of mentioned, everyone I'm sure is experienced, were the earlier they were in the program, the more likely they were to be greater than 50% nonsense, misspellings, non-smelters, things like that. So working through that list, the next challenge then was, since we're both a end and have customers, was creating our own CMRT and getting a smelter list on that and trying to consolidate all these smelters. And some of our suppliers would give us lists of 200 to 300 alleged smelters, and creating a single list for us to provide to our customers upon request. And then the sort of final challenge, and I guess this is only 4, but is reporting this. And this is where we are right now. And the challenge has been very extreme in this. We've started writing a CMR maybe a few months ago, and it's been rewritten many times. And one of the challenges is the SEC guidance as it is not very clear. The rule had some inconsistencies in it. We've even seen where the FAQs issued by the SEC seem to contradict the rule. And we've also, the big issue has been what goes on a Form SD and what goes on a CMR. A lot of differing opinions on that. And what is RCOI versus due diligence? The SEC seemed to think that you would go through a RCOI process, finish that, and start due diligence, when I think for most of us, in actuality, they were the same process. And the result would say that we either are or are not involved with sourcing from the region. So basically, the middle challenges were scoping, who to talk to, finding out who to talk to there, going through the responses, and the multiple iterations. I don't think at the important suppliers we used the first response from anybody. Everyone had to go. We had to go back to get decent information. Then consolidating the smelter list was probably harder than the declarations. And then finally putting all this together for us to file with the SEC. So challenges at every step.
Well, that sounds great, and you're right on schedule.
So my experience basically mirrors a lot of what Mark had just said, in scope and talking to vendors and things of that nature. And I'm not going to try to duplicate what he says. I'm going to add some different things to it so that way people get a different flavor. What I found was there was so much information that you had to dig for. So basically, the information content that you really needed to get to and to help you figure out what you needed to do wasn't readily available. So the information. So specifically, I called up EICC JESI and wanted to know what they used as a definition to add somebody to the smelter list inside the template. Because I was sitting there going, there were some smelters listed in the template, but there was also a conflict-free smelter list. So I needed to know the difference. That information wasn't readily available, so I had to call and ask them. And basically, by the way, what they said was the list in the actual V2.03 or 3.0 was smelters that met the definition of smelter, nothing else. So if they said that they were David Cheek smelter, and they were a smelter and they met that definition, they were added to the list. That brings up the question of, the potential for funding the war because the smelters weren't validated at that point in time. They only met the definition. So that's a big one that I found out. Second is the long pole in the tent that I'm finding. And I'm a little bit further down the road than, well, probably not, probably at the same point Mark is, but I am looking at the entire smelter list that Mark had mentioned. We tied all of the smelters together and basically had a list of X number of 100, 500, 600, 700 smelters that were identified when we pulled all the smelter information together. We filtered through them and we end up with a list of several hundred. Well, as you know, there are currently 85 smelters on the conflict-free smelter list and 17 in process, so about approximately 100. If you ended up with several hundred smelters, identified smelters, you subtract 100, you still end up with several hundred. So the issue was, how do you take that list of identified smelters after you subtracted the conflict-free smelters and work that list? That's where the rubber hits the road, if you will. You have to find, you have to dig down and look at each of those smelters.
So managing the smelters has been a huge issue then for you.
Huge issue, yes. And so as an exercise, we took the tantalum smelters that we had identified, and there was a list of approximately, 35, 40. We went through and massaged them, and we ended up with a list of approximately 19. So we cut the list down by half. The ones that we excluded were not actually smelters. They were distributors and things of that other nature. But you had to do the research to figure that out, and it took time. So where I'm going with this message is that, you know, where do you find information on the non-CFIS smelter? Big issue, and that's where kind of the industry's stuck right now.
Yeah.
And sorry about taking up time. It's just other things that you find out. You know, companies are asking for their specific format to be filled in, or companies don't post to websites, things of that nature. So you've got to figure all this stuff out. And then the other big one is the lack of knowledge. You know, a lot of companies, because of the financial burden associated with this, tend to kick the can down the street or not do the due diligence when when smelter information is provided to them. You know, I'm left with reviewing this information where they could have, but, you know, lack of resources. So I think I've taken up my share of 3 minutes, and get Gary to add to it.
Okay. So I would kind of echo everything that everyone else has said so far. Our biggest problem was actually working with the data that the suppliers gave us. That data turned out to be very difficult to process and in many cases inaccurate. And we spent countless hours going through that data and trying to consolidate it in order to report to our customers and also deal with how we were going to report to the SEC in less than a month. So without trying to rehash everything that's already been said, that's pretty much a brief summary of where our most difficult challenges were. Supplier education, communicating with the right contact, processing all this data, re-engaging with the supplier for corrections, understanding the implications of SD reporting. All those things have been previously discussed, and those were also our issues.
Great. So what we've got is a fairly clear message of scoping, managing names, responses, and working with the suppliers to develop the responses, quality information, sorting that out, big issues. And then the next one, of course, is the challenges in dealing with the smelters, confusion over the smelter listings, which ones could be relied on, and where you could get information on non-CFSI smelters. So what I'd like to do, those are all consistent, and it sounds, I think, like in our experience, very similar to what others have run into. So let's move forward and say, what have you found particularly effective in dealing with these issues? And let me start off this. Gary, you got the shortest dibs last time, so could you start this time?
Okay. Well, we did a couple of things. We identified really all of the suppliers that we had. We removed suppliers that obviously didn't have the possibility of metals, so that would be a lot of packaging kind of products, plastics, things like that. And then we broke the remaining suppliers into two groups. One was assembled products that we buy, like maybe a power supply module or a display module or something like that, and we contacted those suppliers directly. And then there were discrete components, and we used a third-party database to go after EICC data sheets. We required EICC data sheets from all of our suppliers. Once we obtained those data sheets, that's where the difficulty began, and in processing that data and all the errors that you'll find if you start to go through that. The errors are almost countless, from spelling errors to data being in the wrong columns to identified smelters that weren't really smelters. It was very difficult, and what we found was we weren't able to move on to the next steps that we needed to do because we were spending so much of our efforts processing this data. So we have found that using software that will process that data for us is immensely helpful, because then it allows us to identify problems very readily and go back to the suppliers and ask for corrections and updates, and and then also give us risk assessment for how we need to process our suppliers down the road.
Great. David, do you want to, can you add to that, or can you pick up from there?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mirror what Gary just stated. I spent a lot of time working with suppliers. Unfortunately, I didn't have access to tools, and so this was more manual for me. That's okay. Gave me a lot of insight into what they're doing. And as what Gary said, finding errors and working, sending emails back and forth, making calls. It was, multiple emails and phone calls to vendors to just get to a place where you can believe the data that they were saying, that they're providing. What has also been particularly effective was I developed my own documentation. I took, for example, a way to evaluate the EICC GESI template. How do you look at it and go, it's good or bad? And so I created my own documentation, and fortunately I found the same exact thing online a little bit cleaner, so I'm using that from a different company. But getting that data, knowing, figuring out what you need to look at, there are software tools, and as Gary says, being able to get to where you need to be to evaluate this data, that's very crucial. Because if you've got a whole list of smelters, you don't want to go through each one. You want to basically say, hey, these are good and these are bad, and I have to work these. And requiring suppliers to use the template. I mean, I've got a listing right now of suppliers that, and I've made contacts with them, repeated contacts, either phone and emails, to request that they move from a PDF, which doesn't provide the smelter information, to the EICC GESI template. And I'm finding that they are somewhat reluctant, but they are moving to the template, but at a snail's pace. Out of 50 calls or emails that I sent out, I may get one or two saying, we are providing that information. So companies are reluctant to move off that PDF. That's what I found effective in doing it. So making direct contact with them. I found that sending them an email, the email could potentially disappear into the ether and go, okay, I didn't get it, I didn't see it, or I'm ignoring it. So, you may have to make multiple calls or multiple emails going back and forth to get what you need.
And just to pause for a moment, both Gary and David, neither of you talked about the approaches that worked in the working with the smelters more specifically. Both of you highlighted those as issues. Any quick thoughts on that?
This is Gary. We didn't work with smelters directly, but we did process smelter data, obviously we've had an opportunity to use the Green Status Pro software, which was immensely helpful in sorting through all of that data, and saved us significant amounts of time in order to go back and start. So because we don't purchase anything directly from a smelter, so ultimately we're going back to our suppliers and telling them, hey, look, the data that you fed me has these issues, and we'd like you to go back and rectify that or update the data so that we can actually make use of it. And in order to do that, you have to process the data that they've given you.
I mirror the same opinion,
Well,
that Gary just stated.
Thanks, and of course we're thrilled that you mentioned Green Status Pro, but this is not really a promotion for Green Status Pro. But thank you very much, Mark. Do you want to pick up on this and we give your thoughts?
Yeah, okay. One of the things I think, to repeat what someone said, is that dividing our parts into custom parts and off-the-shelf parts, the components, and we used a third party also to dig into the 400-some suppliers of off-the-shelf parts. And we concentrated our personal effort on the custom parts made for us. And most of those suppliers are in Asia, so we had a potential language problem. So we've done two things that were extremely helpful. First is that we did go ahead and at the time it was called the EICC Jesse Extractives Working Group, and we did join that. I thought the $5,000 was really well spent. That gave us access to a lot of the EICC or CFSI now information, including information on, it's not available to the public out there besides the RCOI. It's, who is not a smelter, who's been investigated. We submit names that we got that were not verified, and we also volunteered to help in research of these to determine their status. So joining CFSI was a very useful thing to do. There's lots of peer interaction, idea exchanges, best practices, very useful. The second thing that I did is that, or we did, is since we're fortunate enough to have some offices in China, we worked through them with our Chinese suppliers, and in conjunction with a CFSI workshop in Hong Kong, I traveled and went to our office in Shenzhen and did face-to-face meetings with about 25 to 30 of our major suppliers in China and in South Asia. That was extremely helpful, just sitting down with them and explaining things to them, get to know me, get to know you, and it turned out just being very patient and repeated contact, getting a personal connection, training it, looking at it as a partnership, that really seemed to help. And after we did that, the level of the content really improved significantly. So I think what really did work was getting down on a sort of peer-to-peer basis with the suppliers, not doing it as like an order on high from purchasing or VP of materials, but establishing a relationship, a working relationship. That really helped get the information. And we actually have had some of our suppliers help us do smelter research because they're closer than we are, and they're in the same country, speak the same language.
Okay, so it seems like all three of you have talked about the challenges in communicating with the suppliers, getting correct information, and the advantages. Several of you mentioned the advantages of and the necessity of automating, or the value associated with automating that. And then Mark, this idea of joining and the value associated with the industry target associations, whether it's EICC or the other industry associations outside of electronics, I think you'll find that has been well taken and great choices.
Right.
And
as a matter of fact,
pardon me?
I was going to say that is almost directly out of the OECD guidance supplement for tin tantalum, is participate in industry organizations, because they realize that most of us are so far removed from the smelter, we have no direct contact, and it's very difficult.
So that really worked also. That's great advice. So let me get to really the heart of the session, which is, okay, we've talked about that. We've gotten a little bit of a background about what the struggles you went through and how you approached them. So let's start off with David this time. What are your lessons learned? What are you going to be doing differently? Or obviously scoping is going to be quite different for you, I would think, this coming year. And what are your lessons learned?
Well, one of the lessons learned that I came away with was that knowing what is important to your customer. And I found this out, I was capturing information from the template, specifically questions 1 and 2. Do you use 3TG, and do you source from the DRC? And my customers were asking, hey, we need to know about recycling, which was question 3, which I wasn't capturing, which was kind of interesting. So knowing what your customers are really requiring that, to be reported to them, not only on the template, but, other information. That was one of the things I came away with as my lessons learned. The other thing that I came away with was you have to be discerning of the smelter information provided by the supplier. I mean, and this goes to basically what Mark and Gary, and I'm just regurgitating in essence, but not relying on the face value of what they're providing. It's amazing, and Gary and Mark can probably chime in, and it's like, you know, the suppliers are not validating the information that they are collecting, and they're just turning around, putting it in a form and shipping it to you, relying on us to validate that information. So you cannot take the information that they provide at face value, which is really important, because you would assume that if a supplier is going to give you this information, they've got processes in place to say, yes, we've gone through and verified that all these smelters are correct and do not source from the DRC. The other thing too that I found was that on the database tools, and I'm not that are used to provide material information, data sheets, things of that nature, so we all know who, some of the suppliers. And one of the big issues I found was that you don't know as a user how old the information that's in the database. For example, if you're sitting at, we are now currently sitting at v3.0 for the EICC JESI template. You don't know that if the supplier provides you with a template that is at 2.03 or younger or newer, whether that's the latest or not. So under good conscience, you have to go, well, I've got this, they've provided me this data, and I have to go to the actual website, the OEM website, and verify that that is the latest and greatest. So you've got additional work on top of that. So you're constantly questioning, is this the latest and greatest that I'm being given or being provided to me? So what I would do differently for the coming years is basically be a little bit, not be as accepting as this, and continue pushing back harder on the suppliers of the data that is provided to me because of that fact.
That's great lessons. Mark, do you want to pick up from there?
Sure. What we will do differently is that, in 2013, our process was pretty much entirely manual. We, tracked our emails within Outlook and saved messages, tried to save messages. We collected the JESI forms manually, used the dashboard to some extent, but mostly all this was manually done. So for next year, we're in the process of evaluating, we're going to get a tool. We're not going to do this manually again. That was just too much pain. What we'll also do differently is, now that the supply chain has gone through one round of this, and they've gone through some learning, we're going to expect more from them. And we're going to actually go beyond just looking at their CMRT. We're going to start asking them for backing documentation. If they say they have a due diligence process, we're going to ask for details. We may even do site visits. So that'll be an improvement. We'll probably expand the number of suppliers we consider critical. That will be a slight change. The same things will repeat. We'll offer training, whether it's in person or web-based. We'll continue to do that, and we will continue to use third-party for gathering information from component suppliers with whom we have no relationship as a direct purchaser. So I think that's what we'll do.
That sounds great. Gary, what are your lessons learned? What would you do the same, and what's different?
Similar to the other panelists, the manual process is so time-consuming that we really need to automate it, and we've taken steps to do that. One of our next steps is to start identifying suppliers who aren't playing ball properly. We've tried to contact them multiple times. We're not getting accurate information, or we're getting confusing information based on how they've completed the JESI form. And so we've started to engage with engineering to let them know that we may be requesting that they remove certain suppliers from their approved vendor list, and they have to evaluate how is that going to impact their ability to go build product. And but the good news is that we're seeing better and better data come across, because a lot of the suppliers that we are using, many other companies are using, and all these companies are kind of pushing back at the same time. So we're not the only ones that are having an issue with some of the data that we're receiving, and we're starting to see an improvement in that. And I have to say that I'm counting on getting better data as the year progresses. We've made a goal here at the company to update our customer responses twice a year. So we go through this basically this monumental effort over and over again twice a year, where we go back and ask for the latest data sheet from our customers, or our suppliers rather, and then we process it all again. So that the task is very much ongoing. You have to repeatedly go through this data because it changes and morphs, and in fact even the SEC requires that you update on a regular basis because they know that things change in the supply chain, and so you've always got to be working with current data, and that's really the biggest challenge and what we're going to focus on moving forward.
So the lessons learned is automate, 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 and work closely and more closely with the supply chain to develop better communications to facilitate the process is a very strong message. That sounds great. And let me pause for a moment here and thank the panel. Comments are a great roadmap for folks that are late into the game for the first year as well as planning for the next. Now we have about 15 minutes for questions from participants. And let me start off with one that's come in from one of our Asian participants. As a contract manufacturer in the electronics industry, we supply PCBA to our customers. We have most of the material manufacturer is appointed by our customer. For this case, we need to gather the manufacturer. I guess the question is, for this case, do we need to gather for the manufacturer the conflict mineral status?
This is David Cheek.
Yes, David.
So I have a friend of mine that has his own contract manufacturing firm here in the Springs, and so I advised him. This isn't one example, I guess. I said basically, since you don't, you have no control over the BOM, which is what, control over the sourcing of the materials, if you will, the listing in the BOM. I basically said the only thing that you need to provide to your customers is what you provide that is not listed on the BOM. So basically solder, packaging, things of that nature, labels if that's not listed. So anything not listed on the BOM you have to basically provide to them. Otherwise, since the contract manufacturer doesn't have any control over the BOM, he basically buys part A from vendor A, which is listed on the bill of materials. The onus is on the OEM essentially, not the contract manufacturer.
So this is Gary. I agree with that 100%. You do have the option, however, to work with your contract manufacturer and say, hey, I would like you to go after some of this data on our behalf, and what are you going to charge to do that? But ultimately, it's your responsibility, whether you contract with someone else to do it for you or whether you do it yourself. You really can't push that off on your contract manufacturer unless they agree to do it.
Yeah, and part of it is the low margins for the contract manufacturer, and then the legal liability if they make an error. So that's gets. I'm not a lawyer. I'm an engineer, but that's what I would be afraid of.
Yes, and go ahead.
This is Mark, and we do have a number of CMs who do PCBAs for us, and our position has been that they do not have to supply us information on anything that they get from our approved parts list. With a small exception, a couple of our contract manufacturers have asked us to add a new supplier for a component because they get a better price. In those cases, we're asking them to provide the information on that for those components.
Well, okay. We have another question that I'll to address the panel with. Going forward, how would you recommend we monitor the conflict-free status of our products?
Well, this is Gary. We bounce all of our smelter data off of the EICC Jesse list, and you know, many people do that, and there are certified suppliers and there are non-certified suppliers, and I think many of us, our company included, is pretty much dependent upon the results of that list as these certifications are ongoing.
Good.
This is David Cheek. I would probably, you know, mirroring what Gary said, and add a couple of other things, and that is, you know, probably periodically, you know, every 6 months, every year, look at your, or prior to when you file your Form SD, look at the deltas on your list. I mean, where are the changes, and probably work the changes. You know, if supplier A drops off the list and is no longer conflict-free, but a new one has been added, you know, you're going to have to work probably the changes. And if they're still on the smelter list, then that's fine. Hopefully they'll still be there and it'll continue to grow.
This is Mark. I'd say, you know, looking at on your smelter list the smelters that are not certified that show up the most, and you know, with a large number of suppliers, some smelters are on 2 or 3 of the submissions you get, some are on, you know, 20 or 30, and I'd be looking at the ones that are showing up a lot. It means they're very large smelters probably, and looking at you know, progress through the industry associations, putting pressure on those smelters, or even, you know, finding the website and sending them an email and urge them to get certified.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that opinion was mirrored. I was reading through the Apple certified smelter list that they provide. They were pushing a lot of the smelters to become CFI certified. So just a comment from, you know, one of the other major manufacturers. Excuse me.
Mark, again, yes, we've had one of our supplier engineers in Shenzhen call some of those, you know, make himself a nuisance. Call them.
It's great suggestions. Here's another question that's come up. What actions have you taken to provide the senior executive in your company who will sign off on Form SD with the confidence to do so?
Okay, this is Mark. We've our group that this Conflict Minerals team has produced for the last year a quarterly formal document, which is, you know, basically a report on Conflict Minerals progress and process, and gets distributed to upper management so they at least are aware of what's going on.
So you're able, go ahead.
This is Gary. So right now, I think 70% of manufacturers are expected to file that they're pretty much uncertain with, you know, where they are because of the data they're getting and how inconsistent it is and incomplete it is. So the first 2 years is, in many cases, for a lot of folks, are going to be undetermined, right? Conflict minerals undetermined. And I think that what our plan is, and we've provided reports just like other folks to upper management, letting them know where we're at, what we're doing, what we've collected. And then next year we plan to get audited regardless of what our reporting status is. This year we're not doing the audit because we're undetermined, but whether we're undetermined or not next year, we're still going to go through with an audit and make sure that, you know, an independent third party looks at our process and agrees that, you know, we're meeting all of the requirements. So that's one of the things that we're planning to do moving forward to help executive higher management feel comfortable with our progress.
What I did was I provided all the smelter information forward and identified, you know, where. Unfortunately, I didn't have to identify that we were sourcing from the DRC and funding the war. We did identify where we are sourcing from the DRC and conflict zone, but sourcing conflict-free, and provided that information forward, and the SD and the CMRT will be based on that. And as far as next year, still trying to figure that out right now.
Mm-hmm. This is another question. Everything else being equal, do your companies give a priority advantage to suppliers that can demonstrate a commitment to achieving the goals of the conflict minerals rule?
That's scary. I think we don't do that, but we kind of do it in the reverse, right? If we're not getting proper data and support from a supplier, we're likely to remove them from the approved source list, but we haven't actually given a positive spin to those folks that are better equipped to give us data than others.
This is Mark, and I guess kind of similar. Not yet. It may happen, but it hasn't happened yet.
This is David. Mine is the same as Mark. It hasn't happened yet. We'll probably will in the future.
Okay, well, listen, this is great. Thank you very much. We've run out of time for this webinar, but before we go, I'd first like to thank our panel for sharing their thoughts and experiences. Thank you, Gary, Mark, and David. Next, I'd like to thank today's participants. Lots of great questions and issues. Congratulations to all for a thought-provoking and informative session. Now, at the beginning, I mentioned that those that want can please stay tuned for a special presentation to see how Green Status Pro's automation tools might help you become compliant in the next 30 days and certainly simplify your life and save money every year thereafter. This will be a brief 15-minute demonstration, and those that are interested, please stay on the webinar line for this follow-on session. In any case, the webinar will be available on the Green Status Pro website within a week. Thanks again for your participation. Now, what I'd like to do is to ask John Logan to walk us through the Green Status Pro's automation tools in the next, say, 10 minutes or so. And participants, please send in questions as you did before. We'll answer these at the end of the session. John, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Rob. That was a very exciting session. Real lessons learned from the trenches. Thanks, guys. What I'd like to do is just go through 3 little issues here. We'd like to talk about managing suppliers' EICC GESI reports and documenting OEC due diligence. As one of our panelists nicely said, you've got to do the OEC due diligence to be able to actually do the RCOI work going forward. We agree. That's the philosophy to go forward with. And what we see is that we've got a 5-step reporting process, don't we? As the panel says, we have to do product scoping to get ourselves to the RCOI, then to do the conflict minerals due diligence, which has been such a headache for everybody, as we've talked about. And now we know in another year we're going to have to prepare for an independent private sector audit. But today we've got to make sure we've got the information available for Form SD. We've designed Ingester and Roadmap to go across all these reporting requirements going forward. And what do we mean? Well, let's begin with the first part, Green Status Pro's RCOI Ingester. What do we do that's so important? First, we validate the data quality. What was the common theme we heard among our panelists today? Data quality on the EICC GESI reports is not appropriate. How do we go through and make sure it's done appropriately? Manual methods, too long, too hard, too tedious, too boring. You're not finding people willing to work to be able to do that. We use technology to do it. And then we consolidate and organize our supplier data, structure the supplier due diligence review, and then we can generate the RCOI reports. Not just the consolidated smelter reports, but additional reports that you need for backup, such as the smelter compliance status report, smelters by supplier, reports looking for errors to get back to our vendors, aggregated declarations report, the famous declarations, and the validation, comprehensive validations reports. We have a set of rules. These validation rules are customizable, but we find that we've met most of the rules that are required for our customers. That is, simple rules like the data completion has to be right, or something very complex such as a high risk if somebody answers yes to question 2. And then we have the validation needed rules for requirements to make sure that we have the EICC GESI report written according to the instructions. We have approximately 25 validation rules that we follow in the system. Well, let's take a second and go through and see how this might work. Let me bring up our system. This is live. We are now running just on a viewer, a web browser, and we are going to upload data and files, and we are going to take them to our secure hosting system. Remember, we run in the cloud, central in the cloud, secure capability, so that we can support multinational companies with access around the world. And if we go to our report, we're going to find that we have our CRM Matees here. Why don't we click on all of them? Once we click them, we're going to open them. Once we open them, they are now being transmitted to SoftLayer, an IBM hosting solution that we use for its high level of security capability. And we're now seeing that as they turn green, they are being processed. What's so exciting about this is what takes hours to do by hand, we're literally doing here in seconds. And as we're finishing these off, you can see we're getting the validation rules down here, so we can see where the company has validation requirements. We're finding the status of it, such as this status green. That's why we're called Green Status Pro. Means we found no problems in the system. And here we're going through, I think, about 19 of these systems that we'll go through, and we're getting a summary report of what was accepted, what was with high risk, accepted with validation, files not readable, that is if somebody gives us a PDF, or more importantly, as we commonly find, people will go and change the template itself, and so it's not readable, and it's not accurate, and it's not appropriate. Once we've gone through all that process, we've got quite a bit of data. Now, what would we like to do with it? Well, we want reports from it. So we've just done these reports. Why don't we get our consolidated smelters report? When we click on that, remember this is live, so our information is coming back from our hosting system. I assume all of you can also be able to put together all the reported smelters as quickly as we just did. You can see how we're saving hours and hours. Accuracy, of course, because we're using technology. And so we'll find that we can go through here and we're going to find all the smelter reports provided to us with all the information that we would expect. And now we have a master list of the smelters that have been reported to us for going forward and the source of who reported which smelters. But then we take that and we consolidate it based upon the smelter ID. Again, that's going to be interesting as we make a transition from version 2.0x to version 3, because now the CFSI has changed the smelter ID to one that implies country or metal country and then gives us a random number to a totally random number as we go forward. And we'll be able to do the translation, obviously. But now we've got the capability to have gone through here. And as we go through, we now take the data, and let's go all the way to the end, and we can find which companies, 2, 3 companies, reported that they use the same smelter. And we've done quite a bit of work here. Now, an important point is to support your customers, you have to give them clean data. So we do rejected entries. Notice there's not enough data in here to be able to determine what the smelter is from our friends at ABC. What's wrong with this? Well, we don't want to pass bad data down to our customers. And then, of course, we find a report that hopefully will go away, a corrective action report where we actually go through and attempt to put together smelters, standard smelter names, alphabetically by metal. And why would we want to do that? Well, if we want to go through and see if our reports are correct, we're going to find that we're going to find companies like Meltor Technologies. Here's a sample. One's in China, one's in Hong Kong, one's not supplied. Are these the same? Are they different? What should we be doing as we go through the our due diligence efforts? In other words, we have to do due diligence, and this provides us a capability to go down even farther in the due diligence process. And then, of course, we want to have which smelters are being approved by the CFSI, which have been audited. And so we keep up to date every week the CFSI compliant smelter listing, compare the smelters that we've got by smelter ID, and now with the check marks, we're able to find which smelters that we have are compliant. And then, as I think it was said by our panelists, which ones we should be sending emails or making visits to and saying, come on, isn't it time you got on the CFSI compliant list? and those are the ones that we get materials from that aren't checkmarked. Again, a required report in our opinion for going forward. Then we go down, and of course we want this aggregated declaration statement. Whoops, wrong, excuse me, clicked the wrong run. Let me go down to that again. The aggregated declaration statement becomes our master directory. What's great about this is it allows us to have, by each of our suppliers, what they declared at the company level, product level, who the representatives are, what the information is. In other words, this is all in an Excel spreadsheet format and provides us the capability to manage our vendors, do our customer search, do our custom reports as we would like it, all the way through the system, giving us the answers to all the questions that they've given. And then if I go to the end, we will have down here all the validation issues. This company was high risk, and here were all the issues we found in their EICC Jesse report that they gave us. Again, another excellent report to go forward. But now there's one more step we believe we're going to need to do, and that is we need to find out how we communicate. I think that became very clear as the panel was talking, that we're communicating with these suppliers. And what we do is we create a virtual due diligence worksheet. So here we can find that the CMRT from Stampling Company had the following validation issues. Well, we're going to call them. I think David made that very clear. And we're going to call them, and we're going to record what we did on the calling, or we can add attached files. In other words, we can do the due diligence portion of our RCOI online using automation, keep it all together, and then we'll come out and report it at the end. Very quick run through of some of the very top end capabilities, but the whole concept being, as I'm sure you can see, save hundreds of hours, increase accuracy, be able to manage the compliance effort more effectively, get rid of much of the hassle. So as we go through that, we still have an issue going forward, and that is it's May 1st, and this is due May 31st. So what we are doing at Green Status Pro is offering this as a service. If anybody would like to supply us with their suppliers' EICC Jesse conflict minerals reports, we'll validate the quality of the data, generate and deliver the reports that you need, fast, cost savings, accurate, 2 business day turnaround. Please feel comfortable contacting us. We can have this report ready for you in 2 business days. Much faster than you can do manually. And then there's the last part, which is the due diligence portion. Again, as the panel brought up, we have the issue that we're going to be audited in a year. And so here we have the requirement from the auditors that the company's due diligence framework materially conforms with the OECD guidance, and the company's description of the due diligence measures its performance is consistent. Well, you know, we have a lot of divisions in many of our corporations around the world. How can we maintain that? How can we manage it? Well, the way we look at it is roadmap CM due diligence. We can state the task names that were required. You saw some of them coming up today. Can we confirm our sourcing policy? Do we have the right management organization in place? How did we do our scoping? What's our supplier communications? We heard a lot of that going on today of how to maintain. And we can go through this on a custom basis further if you'd like to see. But it's a fast-track way to come and do your annual review based on SEC, OECD, and EICC, EFSI reasonable practices. And we're going to take these reasonable practices, turn them into tasks, and finally come up with an auditable due diligence report. What do we mean by that? Well, let's go right back into the demo, and let's get this live again, and let's go over our reviews. When we go to our reviews, we're going to go into the annual end of year review. Let's do the scoping, which is our major problem. Let's face it, what we have to do is be able to show to the auditors and our customers, and I think that was a major point that came up today, our customers especially were most important, to describe the procedures our company followed, okay, to see if its products contain 3G, and we see that this is going to change over time. The auditors have made a big point that they want to make sure that we observe the no de minimis rule. They've told us that's one of their touch points for the first audits. So we should pay special attention to that. And now we're down here where the company has to rely on supplier declarations of the composition. Describe the procedures your company undertook to verify the representations were accurate regarding the absence of conflict minerals. So again, here we have essentially a consultant in the box. We can go in and add a comment or a title and state what we've done. And now what's very important, very, very important, let me just put in some test characters here, some T's. When we submit it, your auditor is going to insist that they find out who did what when. So now we've set the audit trail that the auditors are going to require going forward. Absolutely a requirement for going forward in this type of capabilities. When we're working on it, it comes out of a library. In that library, we have these as protocol templates. They can be modified by you. You can make them specific to your company's in operations needs. And then when we're done and we need to do a report, we can come over to get the report for the year, click this out, and in a PDF that will be available to our auditors and to our, let me make sure I click that right. I didn't click it. We will have a whole report saying, here's the validation issues we had, and then we'll go through there. Where did we have our TTTs? How we performed our due diligence. If we're looking for that smelter, that's the rogue smelter, how did we deal with that going forward on the RCOIs? All in one step, all automated, central, secure, low cost, affordable. This is technology to automate a manual process so that our specialists in conflict minerals, EHS, can do what they do best, set policy, set procedures, not do clerical work. At the end of the day, these two tools provide all the information we need for our OCI due diligence reports, consolidated smelter reports, our OECD due diligence report. We'll pass our consumer activist and humanitarian requirements. We'll pass the independent private sector audit requirements. And most importantly, our investors, customers, let's face it, our employees are behind this plan. They are behind the conflict mineral rules objectives. We're going to pass their approval. Last slide so we can make it in 15 minutes. Look, Green Status Pros meets the reporting requirements of the SEC auditors and your customers. We're going to pass the NGO and socially conscious customer scrutiny by saying you've done this. Just doing a very simple report that's saying our materials are undeterminable source isn't going to hack it in the long term. We all know that. But we also meet the business requirements of our C-suite and board level. We're mitigating enterprise and brand risk. All of you are familiar with the attacks on the products such as Nintendo for not being conflict-free from around the world. We're demonstrating management commitment, and it's a cost-effective solution. Thank you very, very much for your 15 minutes. Are there any questions? Comments?
Well, John, thanks, John. And thanks to the participants as well. We're out of time today, and we all know that May 31st is coming up awfully quickly. It's just around the corner. We look forward at Green Status Pro to talking further with you offline to review any outstanding questions. Thank you very much. Succeed on May 31st.